welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show, at least give me a good feeling if you're not going to do anything for me. Where am I going with this? Pacifica host Garland Nixon on politics, dopamine, denial, mythologies, and the Matrix.
Hello, Garland Nixon here. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I'm sure a lot of people there watched old Trumpy do his thing. One of the things I'd like to start with is this, and that is Hulk Hogan was out. And one of the things that's interesting, a WWF guy was out there. Why is that interesting to Garland Nixon? Because one of the things that I've discussed was a book. I love to read my books, right? It seems like everything I talk about, I got a book at some point that I've discussed, but a book called Mythologies by Roland Barthes. And in that book, he compared politics to championship wrestling. And I'll get straight to the point. What he basically said was, you watch championship wrestling, good and darn well, if you're an adult, for the most part, it's not real, it's false, blah, blah, blah. The hero ain't really a hero, and the villain's not really a villain, but you get the same good feeling, right? It's like kind of the Matrix kind of thing. You get the same good feeling as though it were not. One of the ways that I just described it to a friend, I'll never forget, I was 22 years old, and I was a 22-year-old guy. We're honest about life here, right? I was a 22-year-old guy, and I was dating this girl. She wasn't the only girl I was dating. I was 22. I didn't pretend that she was my girlfriend or we were getting married. There was a girl I'm dating at 22. And I'll never forget this. And this makes sense. And she was like, "Oh, Garland, I love you, I love you, I love you." I'm 22. I love to like beer and going to sporting events, but I had the IQ of an amoeba at that age, right? But she would say, "Well, Garland, why don't you tell me you love me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't want to say I'm 22, for God's sake. What do you expect? I'm not that bright." But at some point, she would say, "Well, tell me you love me, even if you don't mean it. I just want to hear it." And at some point and later on in life, I realized what she was saying was, I get a dopamine release from that. I get a good feeling from that. And I want the feeling that I get from you saying that, even if I don't have that. Where am I going with that? Well, Trump doesn't tell the truth, and he says he's going to do all these great things for the working class and blah, 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 blah. Look, Hulk Hogan came out. He was a wrestler. People watch wrestling not because they think that Hulk Hogan was really going to beat the guy up, that he was a hero, that he and Randy Savage were the good guys and whoever, the Iron Sheik or whoever was the bad guy. It was because they enjoyed the dopamine release. They enjoyed the good feeling they got. A lot of people don't understand this about politics, that once people have given up on getting results, once they're like, "Hey, nobody's going to do anything for us," what they'll take is, "Well, if I don't think you really love me, at least I get a good feeling from you saying that you love me." That's what they think about politicians. Hey, if you ain't going to do a damn thing for me, I've come to that conclusion. But at least give me a good feeling I'm going to get. Tell me you're going to do something for me, right? And a lot of the liberal class don't understand that concept from those working class, working poor, and poor people. They don't understand that part of them giving up any hope, abandon hope, all ye who enter the political atmosphere in the United States. That one of the, people deal with that pain in different ways. Some people deal with that pain and saying, "I ain't even voting. I'm going to disassociate," right? That's called disassociation. I don't even know what's going on. I'm going to go over here and do something else. I'm going to go fishing. There's nothing wrong with that. Other people deal with the denial. Everything's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. And other people deal with it by saying, "You know what? I ain't going to get nothing out of these people. Maybe I can just get a good feeling from them." Like peeing yourself in a dark suit. Nobody really notices, but you get a warm feeling, right? That's what it is. It's people listening to old Trumpy, and then the liberal class will say, "But he lies," and then the people will say, "Yeah, but everybody lies. You lie, he lies, everybody lies." But at least he'll tell me that he loves me. know he don't love me. I know you don't love me, but at least he'll tell me that he loves me. I'll take that. It's desperation. It's the way that some people deal with it when they give up, when all hope is lost, when they throw in the towel. You know, there are those of us who just sit back and kind of evaluate it and like, man, well, we understand the game. But there's other people who are, you know, they want hope and change, right? And Trump says, I'm gonna give you hope and change. And they're like, but he doesn't use the terms hope and change. Obama said, I'm going to give you hope and change. And, you know, that was a phrase that he coined. He might as well have trademarked it, right? Hope and change. And it sounded good because people said, I want hope and change. But he didn't specifically say what change you were going to get. He just said hope and change, right? And he seemed like a nice guy. He seemed like he was smart. He looked different. He was black. He was mixed. He was whatever. So people could see metaphorically with Obama. They saw metaphorically hope and change. He was younger, all those things. He was talented, and they in their mind, they saw change, they heard change, and they thought, I'm going to get change. They didn't get change. While he was telling us he was going to do hope and change, he was going back to Wall Street saying, I'm the only thing that stands between you and the pitchforks. Truth is, he was an elaborate psyop. He looked good. He sounded good. He had a beautiful family. All of those things seemed like the right thing, but it was the system saying, we figured you out. We got you figured out. We know what you want. You want something different. We're going to give you Hulk Hogan. We're going to give you something that appears to be different. We're going to give you the guy that comes out and says, let me tell you, brother, I'm going to slam the Iron Sheik and I'm going to do this, that. And you're like, yeah, the good guy's going to defeat the bad guys. That's what you got with Obama. But that ain't going to play no more. The liberal thing. So Trump comes out and he's like, look, you know, guys, he talks to the working class. What did he say in his convention speech? I'm not saying, don't get me wrong. I don't want people in the chat. People go in the chat when I have this. Trump's a liar. Trump's a fraud. I'm not talking about whether what he says is true. I'm not talking about whether it's genuine. I'm not talking about whether he can do it. That's a different conversation. The issue is, can he get elected with that rhetoric? Can he get support with that rhetoric? When people are looking at the Democrats, who have become what? The party of the elite, the party of the complete ruling elite. Not that the Republicans aren't, but even the Democrats' rhetoric is the rhetoric of the ruling elite, right? If you look at the Democrats, they're at a point like they ain't even trying to fool their constituents anymore. They're not like, hey guys, you get a say in who nah. They didn't have, they literally, a number of the states in the Democratic primaries, they just put Joe Biden. It was like a banana republic country. They just put Joe Biden's name on the ballot and nobody else's. Even though like Dean Smith, Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr. was running there like, yeah, we're not putting their names on the ballot. Here's your choice, Joe Biden. Well, what if I want somebody else? No problem. You can pick Joe Biden. His name's on there. But I don't like Joe Biden. Oh, well, that's fair enough. In that case, we got just a guy for you. Who's that? Joe Biden. Shut up. People are like, yeah, right? And now they're just like, you know, yeah, fair enough. We've been telling you that Joe Biden is sharp as a nail. Joe Biden is the second coming of Stephen Hawking. Man, this guy is brilliant. He's FDR. He's everything you could ever wanted. You just vote for Joe Biden. You can eat cake and ice cream three times a day, and you'll never gain a pound. He's the best. He's going to bring back everything. Peace, love, you know, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, I don't think he's quite right. He goes out there and he exposes himself. He exposes the media for lying. He exposes his party as being a pile of lying crap. And people are like, yeah, kind of been had. And what do? All right, here's the plan. What? We're going to go out and select somebody and you're going to vote for him. I think that's going to be a problem. And guess what you're going to get? You're going to get 4 more years of what you got. People are like, ooh, yeah, well, how about we don't get any of that? Trump comes out. His rhetoric is important. And he talks working class rhetoric. He mentions unions. Granted, the Republicans have always screwed unions. Again, we're not talking about what they're doing. We're talking about what they're saying. Big difference in politics. You got to understand that. Now, one of the things that Trump says is basically, I'm going to deal, get this. He says, I'm going to deal with China, right? There, China's a problem, but he didn't go militaristic on it, right? He didn't say we got to protect Taiwan. What did he say? If you read his interview, it's important that you read his interview with Bloomberg. What did he say? He said, we don't want any more wars. I don't want to start any more wars. He said, Taiwan's 9,500 miles away, which is not quite 9,500 miles away, but Trump, he always adds a couple thousand miles for effect. And I understand that. 9,500 miles away at 68 miles from China. Come on. Basically, what Trump says about Taiwan is we ain't winning that war. Let's not be stupid. And it's more important to them than it is to us. So basically, in his Bloomberg speech, he says, I ain't going to war over Taiwan. That's not happening. Right. There was the strategic ambiguity, they said, where for years, where the U.S. wouldn't say whether or not it'd go to war on China. Biden has gotten rid of it, where he said over Taiwan. Biden has gotten rid of the strategic ambiguity, where he says we will. Trump's getting rid of it too, where he's saying we won't. Right. He goes on to say, and I'm mixing up the two because what I'm trying to do is get together Trump's rhetoric. Not whether or not he will or won't do it, but we're talking about his rhetoric, what he's saying, whether it's attractive to people, etc. We're putting that together. That's what you and I are doing. And by you and I mean me. So at any rate, so he then goes to say something interesting, and let's comment on that. He says that China's building these gigantic factories in Mexico. They're building cars in Mexico, and then they're going to ship them here, and we ain't getting nothing out of it. We get the purchase, so we get nothing out of it. And he says, no, that ain't going to happen. They're going to build them here. Now, think about that. Let's get into that for a second. What is Trump saying? Trump is saying something similar to what I've said, which is I've said, look, if it was me and I was president of the United States, what would I say? I'd say, look, China's got this big manufacturing base. Man, they may want to spread it around the world a little bit. They're building stuff. I'd say to China, look, why don't you build some stuff here? Our guy needs jobs. We don't want to fight. You don't want to fight. We don't want to continue to argue and go back and forth. You don't want to continue to argue and go back and forth. Why don't you spread some of that spread the love, brother. Spread the love. Well, you're building cars more than anybody in the world. Why don't you come in here with the UAW? I'll meet with the UAW. We'll build some factories here. You'll build some cars here. What else? You got some other things to build. We'll build some stuff here. That way we can kind of resolve our issues. You can still have access to our market. We can have access to your market. We don't have to get tariffs. Our guys can eat. Everybody eats. What's not to like? That's what I said. Trump comes out and says that. Exactly what I said. Hey, well, why don't they start doing some manufacturing here? Well, guess what? Add this. You can't very well go to war with them if they're building factories here. He's talking about joint economic ventures with China. Now, I'll get to the holes in that in a second, but let me just first talk about that. He sounds like Putin and Modi and Xi and all of these people who are saying, you know what, Belt and Road initiatives, the northern route of Russia saying the northern route. What he's saying is we got these big, powerful countries. Everybody needs to eat. Let's do some joint economic ventures. That is like bringing you into what the world's moving to right now. Joint economic ventures, right? Russia is opening some car factories in Africa, and there will be more of that. There will be more of that. What happens? The Africans get jobs. The African gets money there. Russia gets to build his cars and sell them in Africa. Everybody's eating, right? Trump says that. Now, after that, there's one hole in that, and he can thank the friggin' neocons and somewhat himself for that. Think about this. Something else came out today where if I can find it, the neocons that are now saying we're going to snag, let me find it. Here we go. Look at this. Here's the monkey wrench in that whole let's work with China plan. Ready? Euroclear confirms confiscation of Russian assets. Here's the deal. Who the hell in their right mind is going to do a joint economic venture with the U.S.? When you start taking people's stuff, think about it.
And now on Arts Express, perhaps best known for portraying the sister of J.D. Vance in his Ron Howard-directed page-to-screen memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, actress Haley Bennett has carved out a body of work that ranges from real-life villains to valiant females, as Carolyn Bryant in Till, whose accusations led to the torture and murder of Emmett Till, to her current depiction in Widow Cliquot of a woman who defied the male-dominated world and Napoleon back then in the 18th century, struggling to prevail as a woman over her own vineyard, as well as her upcoming turn recreating the work of Virginia Woolf on screen. First, some scenes from Widow Cliquot, then Haley Bennett.
Welcome to the vineyards of Versy.
Francois willed the vines to me because he knew I would never sell. I will be continuing to care for them myself.
Wine is a very difficult vocation, my dear. You underestimate what it will require of you.
I know what it requires. I've been in the fields for years.
You have one chance. One.
A woman is not capable of running this vineyard.
When I have proceeds, I will send them to you.
No one can sell abroad due to Napoleon's embargoes against his enemies.
I want to stay ahead of him.
Of Napoleon. So you're a criminal at heart.
Human beings are compelled to create, to lay down our lives, however best we can. It is so that we might uncover the secrets of ourselves. And that with any luck, 100 years from now, someone will know that we were here.
Hi.
Hi, hello, Haley, and welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, what was it about the life story of Cliquot that led you to embrace her as a character and be part of this film?
Oh, gosh, it's such a loaded answer for me. Widow Cliquot became known as the Grand Dame of Champagne after she served as head of her suddenly deceased husband's failing wine enterprise when she was 27. And at the time, women weren't allowed to operate businesses or own businesses, so she was incredibly brave. She defied convention, and she managed to behold an empire. But personally, I loved her connection with nature and the divine, and we share that. She also, I have a funny little fact about her. She had an affinity for beautiful things and beautiful men. And she never remarried by choice, but it was said that she surrounded herself with beautiful men who were easy on the eyes, and I really loved that idea. The love of her life died, and he treated her like an equal, and she had her daughter and her vineyard and her wine and her success. That sounds pretty good.
Now, you recently portrayed another real-life figure, but the very opposite of heroic Cliquot, Carolyn Bryant, a villain responsible for the torture and murder of Emmett Till. How would you say you compare and contrast your approach portraying such opposite figures?
I guess my job is to serve a story. So when I was approached to play Carolyn Bryant, I knew that would be an incredibly difficult task. And I did so with humility and holding the hand of my wonderful cast and crew. Danielle, who is incredible, who played Mamie, and Emmett, and our director, Daniela Deadweiler. So, you do whatever you can, and you do whatever you can to serve a story, and you do it to the best of your ability.
And speaking about women, what can you say, I wanted to ask you, about your choice to star in the upcoming Virginia Woolf's Night and Day, both your admiration for Woolf and a film about, quote, a passionate astronomer who is determined to avoid any romance, love, marriage, and commitments?
It's a really, I've been wanting to do a comedy for a long time, and I think that Virginia Woolf lends her sense of humor to comedy so well. It's got a great cast. I live in the UK, so it's exciting to do another film in England and with Timothy Spall and Jennifer Saunders and Tina Garavi, who is a BAFTA-nominated director. It's a really great team to be working with, and I can't wait to see what comes of that. Right now I'm in Canada making a series for Apple TV called The Last Frontier alongside Jason Clarke. And that's been incredibly exciting and challenging and in a way that I've never experienced before, but it's also very intense and masculine, so doing a film like Night and Day will be a great relief.
And what would you like audiences to understand about Widow Cliquot as a woman, both emotionally and historically?
I think I just want audiences to discover a story about this extraordinary woman in history who's gone unknown for a long time and who deserves to have her story told. I've had so many conversations with people about, have you drank Veuve Clicquot? Have you gotten drunk from Veuve Clicquot? And unless you speak French or you're a history buff, you probably don't know that Veuve means widow, and what it took to, what she went through to create, such an everlasting. She was really an extraordinary woman, and that deserves to be applauded, and she deserves to have the credit for that. And I'm so excited just to introduce audiences to this character. She is known as the Grande Dame of Champagne in France, and I'm excited that the film comes out and that, that we can be better acquainted here in America with her inspiring story. And I think it's just important to shine light on stories about ambitious, successful women. It's inspiring when I see women taking control of their destiny, especially when they face challenges, women who lead the pack and women who are forward-thinking and have a distinctive perspective.
And would you say you brought anything to your role in Widow Cliquot from any struggle of yours that you may have faced over the years as a woman in the male-dominated film world?
I think it's the struggles that we endure that shape us into who we're meant to be. And I have just accepted that. I think I've just accepted that. I am where I am, and that I'm meant to be exactly where I am. We don't need to rush things. And, the harder the struggle, the more nuanced and full of character, the more beautiful and the stronger we become.
Okay, thank you so much, Haley Bennett, for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good evening, this is Jack Clarke, and today we have a special edition of the UK Desk. Tonight we have the pleasure of speaking again with Dr. Matthew Alford, a filmmaker who co-produced Theatres of War and The Writer with No Hands, a former parliamentary candidate and an all-around D-list anti-celebrity. In tonight's show, I've delved into Matthew's recent writings on his Substack, along with those of many analysts, political commentators and wannabe Nostradamuses, who are all shouting out about the potential of a third world war. If the film Threads has taught me anything, it's that even in the face of nuclear annihilation, Sheffield might finally get the urban redevelopment it desperately needs. Dr. Matthew Alford, welcome back to the show. Now, bookies gave a 4% chance of a nuclear attack by June. With US-Russia tensions over Ukraine and the recent Trump assassination attempt, do you think this risk has increased?
I think on the attempted Trump murder, what it indicates is how precarious the MAGA movement is, because it's really all built around Trump's personality cult. I mean, I know there was the Tea Party movement in the 2010s, but that was largely leaderless. So I think MAGA is really dependent upon Trump. Does that particular incident increase the chances of nuclear war? No, I don't think so. Only if a follow-up attempt is successful. Because frankly, Trump is the better candidate for global stability. I mean, I still think he's bad news, and all the more so if he chooses some horrible swamp creatures like he did last time for his cabinet, like Pence and Pompeo and Bolton. I just hope he's learnt his lesson. As for Biden, I consider him to be a double threat. I never really know whether he's going to press the button or keel over on it. By the time this interview goes out, maybe he'll have gone. I mean, there's a parallel situation to the attempted Trump assassination. I mean, Ukraine recently admitted to making assassination attempts on Russia's president. Not that anyone in the media seems remotely interested. But I mean, imagine if they got lucky with an assassination attempt there. Who would replace Putin? How might that person react when trying to cement their power in Moscow? All powerful states like Britain and Russia and all the rest of them have explicit written doctrines saying how and when they will use nuclear weapons. And it always includes if their territorial integrity or their sovereignty is violated. And of course, murdering the president of that country would surely fit that criteria. What I find quite annoying is that there are a lot of talking heads, commentators who say that Russia will never use nuclear weapons because of deterrence or whatever. And frankly, I think that these kind of views are simplistic to the point of actually being deceitful. Of course, Putin won't suddenly nuke London just if we happen to kill a few Russian soldiers. But what will happen if we do kill some of their soldiers? Russia will go up the escalation ladder. And this was a concept well understood in the Cold War. And during that tit for tat going up the escalation ladder, somebody somewhere might think that they're better off exploding a nuke to re-establish their dominance, their escalation dominance. Sean Connery says it in a nice little line in the classic crime movie The Untouchables. You want to know how to get Capone? They pull a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital. You send one of his to the morgue. That's escalation dominance. That's the escalation ladder.
You humorously compared Biden to a homelander from Wish. How might his track record in Iraq, Libya and Afghanistan inform his approach to current conflicts?
I actually just asked ChatGPT that precise question just to see what it would say, and it replied, Biden voted for the Iraq war as a senator, and his experience there reinforced his reluctance to engage in prolonged military commitments that can lead to indefinite conflict. And then I asked the question about NATO's war in Libya, and it said, as vice president, Biden supported the war on Libya, and his experiences there reinforced his reluctance to engage in prolonged military commitments that can lead to indefinite conflict. And guess what? Then I asked about Biden's role in Afghanistan, and it said the predictable answer, the same answer, words to the effect. So, I mean, Biden is someone who represents American foreign policy because he's been conducting it for the last 50 years and has done a terrible job of it because American foreign policy is failing, oftentimes on its own terms, and the United States has been declining as a power for 50 years.
Well, considering Cold War near misses and current technology, are we better or worse equipped to handle nuclear crisis today?
The technological system as a whole remains the same as in all of those great Cold War movies you may have seen, Fail Safe, The Day After, War Games, and it's the same situation as before. The only way to win is not to play the game. We know at least 2 occasions where individuals during false alarms, and these individuals were subsequently scorned, derided by their government for their heroism. These 2 individuals successfully stared down powerful colleagues who had actually instigated nuclear launches. Annie Jacobson has got this new book out called Nuclear War. She reveals that inside the president's nuclear briefcase is a piece of laminated plastic, just like a Denny's menu, she describes it. And from that piece of laminated plastic, the president chooses weapons and targets in the 6 minutes that he's told he must decide.
With NATO's increasing involvement in Ukraine, how close are we to a world war, Matt? Are there historical parallels to draw from?
World War III is only real when the great powers actually kill each other's soldiers and have to keep killing each other's soldiers because they feel that they can't afford to back down. Now that's how the First World War got real. That's when Austria-Hungary bombed Belgrade in the dead of night on the 28th of July 1914. Now that was a week prior to Germany's invasion of Belgium, which was the real, when the casualties really mounted up. Now, if 2,000 French troops go to Ukraine, as President Macron says he wants, the Russians are going to kill a bunch of them. And it's hard to see how that's not going to invite retaliation. And it's also hard to see how the F-35 fighter jets from Holland won't lead to combat deaths between NATO and Russia when they're deployed. A couple of years ago, the Russians actually came within a hair's breadth of killing 30 British RAF personnel after a Russian jet misinterpreted an order from the ground. And remarkably, the only reason that they didn't destroy the RAF jet is because their missile jammed in its own bay. Now, at that point of crisis, if and when that happens, which looks very likely, a large number of Russian or American or British, Dutch soldiers dying, it might be that public opinion suddenly turns. Like my colleague thinks that public opinion will suddenly turn. He says, photos of coffins flying to Delaware or Royal Wootton Bassett draped in our national flags. He says, such images led to the US withdrawal from Somalia in 1993. I don't agree. I just don't think the two things are the same. I don't think the US could have cared less about Somalia in 1993. But over Russia, China, Iran, can you really see Biden, Blinken, Austin, Sullivan? Can you see them backing down? I mean, Bill Burns of the CIA, maybe? If they did cave in, I mean, it would be the end of American global domination. They'd just have to pack up and go home. Done. Goodbye. And of course, Ukraine isn't the only flashpoint. Gaza is a humanitarian disaster. Almost 100% of the buildings in Gaza have been bombed. The United Nations says it will take 100 lorries, 15 years to clear the rubble. But also, beyond that, Netanyahu looks set to enter a full-scale war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now that's being billed by both sides as a war with no restraint. And Hezbollah has 10 times the firepower it did back in 2006, which was their last major war. If Netanyahu goes ahead, it ain't just going to be a couple of thousand dead. It'll look like Gaza, but on both sides of the fence, and with a good chance of bringing in Iran directly. Now that's why Iran and Israel so carefully calibrated their military responses back in April of this year to make sure that there was no further retaliation. But it's hard to see such courtesy existing in a war with no restraint. Sometimes I think that the whole planet has just entered the most dangerous few months since the demise of the dinosaurs. And it's particularly unfortunate because I've just started on this fantastic diet.
You criticised Western leaders for sabotaging Ukraine-Russia peace talks. Is a viable path to peace still a possibility?
Yeah, there is usually a path to peace if you're dealing with remotely rational actors. Although Ukraine is never going to have a better set of terms than it did back in April 2022 when Russia literally offered to withdraw to pre-invasion lines and extraordinary compromises from both sides. Now, was Russia sincere back then? Well, the Ukrainian chief negotiator thought so. Everyone interviewed for the Foreign Affairs article and for an earlier one written by the hawkish Fiona Hill seemed to think so. Extensive pieces of primary research in an establishment journal. Who didn't think so? Who thought that Russia wasn't sincere? From what I can tell, it's people who haven't read those pieces and or were badly bullied at school. Namely, Piers Morgan, who dismissed it without evidence on his show and then blathered on about punching bullies in the face. I just stick to badgering spoiled aristocrats, please, Piers.
Recently, General Sir Patrick Saunders compared Russia, China and Iran to the Nazis. How valid are these comparisons?
Well, you may have noticed, Jack, that there's always this contingent of bluff old men with dicky tickers who imagine invaders lurking everywhere. And the media loves all of their crazy forecasts. General predicts Putin will lose everything he gained since 2014. Putin has gone crazy. Sickly Putin will die very soon. End could be near, says Spy Chief. Has any of that happened in the past 2.5 years? No. The US and UK are two of the safest countries in the world. They're separated from their enemies by water, but simultaneously we're two of the most fearful countries, most fearful nations. And it's probably because we're so violent ourselves. China and Iran are not expansionist powers. They never have been. Of course they have the ability to project power, but they are not looking to take swathes of territory. Russia has taken territory on its borders, but to call it imperialist is a joke in comparison to actual imperialism. And while not claiming to be an expert on Russia, it is blatantly obvious that Russia is mainly motivated by standard security concerns and the threat of diminishment that any great power would feel. Understandably, given that last time they trusted the West, their economy fell to bits for 10 years.
PM Robert Fico said Ukraine joining NATO could trigger World War III. How likely is this, and how can we mitigate the risk?
Well, I think that World War III is guaranteed well before we ever admit Ukraine to NATO, which is years away, even by the most optimistic prediction. And I'd point out that there isn't really a significant concern about war among the chattering classes. The front cover of The Economist recently asked, what will World War III mean for investors? It is an absurd question. There cannot be a third world war. Investors would be carbonized with the rest of us.
Writer Mark Fisher argued it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. How does this connect to the current geopolitical climate, Matt?
Yeah, there is a connection between capitalism and imperialism, but so what? Capitalism could be fine without this mad drive for war. I think that's what Trump's been going for. He wants a world of sort of slick investors and gaudy shopping malls, and it sounds gross, but at least it sounds better than 24,000 miles of no man's land. I think US foreign policy isn't always rational. Sometimes there's an element of it that's just so bonkers, that's so driven by the desire to be all-powerful at all costs, that it just can't be explained by economic systems. Personally, I see nothing particularly wrong with a free market. I'd just like to see it a bit more like a jumble sale and a bit less like an arms bazaar.
Now, Matt, we could talk about the end of the world and the potential of nuclear annihilation all day. But what I want to know for listeners at home is, because everything's just so hopeless, what are reasonably the most effective strategies for individuals and groups to influence policymakers and reduce global conflict risk?
Well, I would say raise hell, but our governments already seem set to do that, quite literally. So how about we all join local groups, climate change groups, anti-war groups, whatever it is, and raise something else. Let's raise the standard of political discourse, raise the standard of protest. I don't know if you've ever been to heaven, Jack, but with all those trumpets there, it's very busy, very joyful, and very, very loud. Let's do that.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew Alford, for coming on to the show. If anybody out there wants to read Matthew Alford's writings more closely, they can be found by searching Dr. Matthew Alford on Substack.com. And if one day you don't want to wake up in a bed of ashes and a field of bones, then please remember the power to prevent conflict starts with us. Get involved in your local anti-war groups. Make your voices heard and push for peace in our communities and beyond. Together, we can make a difference. Stay informed, stay active, and most importantly, stay aware. I've been Jack Clarke for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
And coming up next on Arts Express,
wade into the river, through the rippling shadow waters, steal across the thirsty border, through Saddle. Come bring your hungry body to the golden fields of plenty, from a peso to a penny, through Saddle. Welcome to California, where the friendly farmers will take care of you.
Hi, this is Jack Shalom. One of the most volatile issues facing the U.S. electorate this year concerns so-called open borders. Despite whatever rhetoric may be coming from the two major U.S. political parties, their basic positions are the same. They see open borders as a threat to the country. But is any of the fear-mongering true? Our next guest, a journalist and translator who writes for the Arizona Luminaria, has written a compelling new book called The Case for Open Borders. I'm happy to welcome our guest today, John Washington. Hi, John.
Hi, Jack. Nice to talk to you.
John, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I have been reporting on immigration and border politics for a long time. I also was previously an activist and tried to support immigrant rights. And I noticed a couple trends. The first one was that I saw that borders didn't work very well, that people were able to pretty much get across when they wanted to. There's some cases where people would get picked up and deported, and sometimes some of those folks would remain in their country of origin, but generally people got through. And sometimes it would take a couple tries, but people could get beyond controls, beyond the border, get over the wall. And you start to wonder, this extraordinarily expensive project to try to keep people out that's not working. Why keep on throwing more and more and more money and keep calling for more and more money to try to complete a failing project? And, there's a number of ways to understand how much it fails and how much people are able to get across. You can look at the United States, for example, that for the past 100 years, the percentage of foreign-born population has held pretty steady at below 15%, about 13 to 15% it's ranged. And yet that same century has seen the buildup of an enormous infrastructure and all sorts of policies to try to keep people out. And it's just really not working. So you wonder if there's a better way to go about managing human mobility. And that was one of the major questions I had. And the other one was talking to people, especially on the left, who were very ready to decry the current bordering regime. They would call out the worst tactics. They would call out the inhumanity that they were seeing in the way that policies were enforced, or the way that the people suffered along the world's borderlines. And when you say, okay, yeah, I agree, I think it's really inhumane, but what should we be doing instead? And I found that answers were often pretty vague. So I started looking into, okay, well, what is a solution here? What's an alternative to the status quo, the sort of mounting status quo of crackdown upon crackdown? And I started poking around the idea of open borders and realized that we have something like historical precedent. We have certain models or examples across the world. And just given the amount of suffering that borders and immigration enforcement prompts, maybe we should be trying something different.
Your book is really comprehensive with scores of examples. And at the end, you list 21 arguments for open borders and then proceed to knock down objections to each one. I'm just going to list some of them because I can't list all 21 on the air, but here are a couple. 1, borders have not always existed. 2, immigrants don't steal jobs, they create them. 3, walls don't work. 4, the nonsense of nationalism. 5, the right to migrate and the right to remain, and so on. And you take each of these ideas and you elaborate on all of them quite beautifully. So maybe we can talk first about, why is using the metaphor that the country is a house and one has a right to lock one's door, why is that a misleading metaphor to use about immigration and borders?
Yeah, it's a really common one. People lean on that a lot. I lock my doors at night, so shouldn't the nation do the same thing? And, really, I think it's a pretty nonsensical analogy. There's a number of reasons why. And I think the most glaring is that if you're thinking about an individual home that's owned by the person who lives in it, in maybe 100%, nearly 100% of the cases, the people who are living in that home purchased it from a willing buyer, and that was a peaceful transfer of property. And that is not the case in almost any nation state. We can just stick with the United States. That is not what happened here. That is not, this land and this territory was not purchased from a consenting seller. It was violently, genocidally wrested from the people who controlled and lived in the land previously. And so if we were to follow the metaphor of an individual home, that would be sort of trying to justify a person who broke into somebody's home, killed most of the inhabitants, kicked out some of the other ones, and now say, hey, I get to decide who walks in this door, and I get to decide whether or not to lock it or not.
Let me pick up on the economy aspect of it. How do you answer those who say that unlimited migration would create an oversupply of labor and therefore depress local wages?
That is another really common concern. And who's not concerned about that fear is economists. There are really no serious working economists today who don't recognize that actually increases in migration, even very large and very quick increases in migration, are not good for the economy. They are good for the economy. And the way that it works is jobs create other jobs. And, some of the examples that I lean on in the book, in 1980, the Mariel boat lift, where 160, 170,000 Cubans in a few months came to Miami. And hard right economists or hard right politicians really tried hard to make the argument that this was bad for the economy in Miami or bad for Florida. And it just wasn't. Their wages held steady. The employment rate held steady. And in the end, it was actually a boost for the local economy. The counterexample also holds, and that is when people are arrested and deported from a region or an area, that actually depresses wages, depresses the overall economy, and leads to higher unemployment. There's less people to do the jobs that were needed. There's less people to buy the groceries, pay their rents, and things like that.
Well, you even say that borders reinforce wage inequalities, the very wage
much.
inequalities that make people want to migrate.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So, standard narrative has it backwards that, if we are able to lock down a certain amount of people from crossing over to the other side of the border, then we'll be able to protect jobs and protect wages. But actually, there's a number of recent examples we can look at here too. And one of the ones that a lot of people are probably familiar with, but if you just look at how it played out, especially in terms of the question you're asking, is really revealing. And this is NAFTA. This was the free trade agreement that was implemented in 1994. Curiously, this is something that's often forgotten, that exactly matched the most recent rise in the construction of border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and a number of other crackdowns on immigration in immediately subsequent years. What happened is that lots of people, because of the way that trade started happening between the three countries, mostly between the United States and Mexico, lots of people in Mexico lost their jobs or their wages plummeted. At the same time, in the United States, a lot of those jobs left and went into Mexico. So a lot of people in the United States also lost their jobs. And because of the increased enforcement along the line, the U.S.-Mexico border line, people who were making less money in Mexico at what are called maquiladoras, or basically modern-day sweatshops, the reason that corporations were able to pay them less is because they couldn't get across the line. If they were able to cross into the United States, they would be able to compete for jobs that were paying higher wages. But because they were restricted, the corporations were able to pay them less. Meanwhile, because of all the people who were out of jobs in the United States, there was, a number of industries tanked, including, I grew up in Ohio, one of the hearts of the Rust Belt. So people there suffered as well. So it really actually widens inequalities rather than protects one from the other. Again, like, the economists understand this.
Well, one of the most interesting fun facts in your book, I thought, was when people ask, well, does the U.S. have, just pragmatically, the physical room to allow the numbers of migrants that might come in under open borders? You write that the state of Texas could house the entire global population. And I thought that can't possibly be. But, I'm a math guy, and I did a little back of the envelope calculation. I gave everybody 8 billion people a quarter of an acre. And it worked. I was amazed.
Yeah, I don't think that's anyone's ideal. That's not my ideal situation. I don't want to move to Texas, whether or not it's filled with 7 other billion people, 8 other billion people, no matter what. But we do have room. And there's 2 important things to say here, is that I point to a number of other examples of European countries that are, do not feel wildly overcrowded, and their population densities are far, far higher than the population density of the United States. But the idea, and I was sort of touching on this in a previous answer, that everyone would migrate to the United States is wrongheaded. Not everyone wants to come here. I mean, there was a survey that was done a couple years ago, and it supposedly tried to capture how many people would move to the United States if they could, and it was a really big number. I can't remember what it was offhand, but wanting to and being able to, or wanting to and actually doing it, there's a huge gap between those two things. If conditions are decent where they are, people will stay where they are. If conditions are not good enough, they'll move, but they'll usually move rather closely. So the overwhelming majority of people who are forced to flee from their homes these days migrate internally to another place in their own country. Then going beyond and looking at people who are actually cross international boundary, most people move to an adjacent or near neighboring country. So an easy fact here is that currently 90% of all African refugees are living in Africa. They've left their home countries, but they've just moved to another African country. So, a lot of other countries per capita are hosting way more migrants and refugees than the United States. I think, even if we're not going to go all the way to open borders, the United States could receive a lot more, and things would be just fine. In fact, things would probably thrive.
And that was part one of our interview with journalist John Washington, author of the new book, The Case for Open Borders. Tune in next time when we continue our conversation and talk with John Washington about even more compelling reasons to make the case for open borders. This is Jack Shalom for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
Welcome to California, where the friendly farmers will take care of you.
And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, Expression in the Arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.